The day I caught my wife cheating, I thought I'd seen the worst. But the man she was sneaking around with wasn't just anyone. It was my father's lawyer. Together, they weren't only betraying me. They were rewriting my dying father's will, trying to steal the fortune he'd spent a lifetime building. My name is Daniel Hayes. I'm 36 years old, married for 7 years, and the only son of Robert Hayes, the man everyone in our city knew as a legend. My father didn't just build a company, he built an empire from nothing. Real estate, investments, properties, his fingerprints were all over the skyline, and as much as I admired him, there was a shadow over everything these days. His health. Cancer had taken hold of him faster than we expected. What once was a strong, booming presence now lay thin and frail in a hospital bed, his voice raspy, his hands trembling when he reached out for mine. Every visit to his side reminded me that time was running out. Through it all, my wife, Melissa, seemed to be the perfect support. At least, that's what I thought. She was attentive, always by my side, always offering words of comfort, even accompanying me to visit my father when he was strong enough for company. She would hold his hand and smile as if she were already part of the legacy. I thought I was lucky to have a woman like her in my corner. But love has a cruel way of blinding us. Looking back, the signs were there. Subtle, but loud enough if only I'd been paying attention. Melissa started dressing differently. Not the casual jeans and blouse outfits she wore around the house, but sleek dresses, fitted skirts, expensive perfume that clung to her even when she claimed she had just been running errands. She began to take late-night phone calls that she brushed off as friends needing advice. She left the house more often than usual, always with vague explanations. I need to handle something for your dad's paperwork. Or, I'm meeting with a friend about a charity event. At first, I ignored it. Stress does strange things to people, and I thought maybe she was just finding ways to cope. But then I noticed her phone habits. She guarded it like it was a vault, screen always tilted away from me, texts deleted as soon as they came in. And when I reached for her hand one night, she pulled away a little too quickly, as if her mind was already somewhere else. One evening, after visiting my father, I decided to drive home separately. Melissa said she had one last stop to make. I didn't ask questions, but something in her eyes gave her away. Call it intuition, or maybe the sheer weight of suspicion that had been building inside me. But I chose to follow her. She didn't notice me trailing behind as she drove across town. My heart pounded with every turn. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I was paranoid. But then she pulled into the parking lot of a small boutique hotel. My stomach dropped. I parked a few cars away and watched her step out, adjusting her hair, glancing in the mirror before walking inside. 10 minutes passed before a man arrived in a black sedan. At first, I couldn't believe my eyes. It wasn't some random stranger. It was Martin Green, my father's personal attorney, the man who had handled every contract, every deal, every document for decades. Martin was in his 50s, polished, sharp, the kind of man who radiated confidence. He had been around my family for as long as I could remember. He was practically considered family himself. And now he was walking into that hotel after my wife. I sat frozen, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. My chest tightened. This wasn't just infidelity. It was betrayal wrapped in familiarity. Melissa wasn't only sneaking behind my back. She was doing it with the one man entrusted with my father's legacy. I almost drove off. I almost convinced myself not to know more. But anger kept me rooted. I needed proof. I needed to hear it, to see it. So I got out of the car and slipped quietly into the hotel lobby. My hat pulled low. They were there, in the corner of the lounge before heading upstairs. Melissa laughed at something Martin whispered in her ear, her hand brushing his arm like they were young lovers sneaking away. I couldn't stomach it, so I turned, planning to leave. That's when I heard it. "We just need to finalize the changes before Robert passes," Martin said softly, leaning in. Melissa's smile widened. "And once that's done, Daniel will be left with nothing. He won't even see it coming." The words struck harder than the affair itself. This wasn't just about passion or lust. This was calculated. They were planning to erase me, not just from Melissa's life, but from my own family's fortune. I stumbled back, pulse racing, mind spinning. My wife, the woman I trusted with my heart, was conspiring with my father's lawyer to strip me of everything. I left before they saw me. The drive home felt like a blur. Questions tore through my head like bullets. How long had this been going on? Did my father know? Was he even aware of the changes being made to his will? Or had Melissa and Martin found a way to manipulate him in his weakened state? When I walked into our house later, Melissa was already there, acting as though nothing had happened. She greeted me with a kiss on the cheek, her perfume still clinging to her clothes, her smile practiced and hollow. I forced a smile back, hiding the storm brewing inside me. That night, as she slept beside me, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. Rage burned through me, but I knew better than to act impulsively. They thought they were clever, that they could play me for a fool. But if Melissa and Martin were rewriting my father's legacy, then I would rewrite the ending of their story. And I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I wasn't about to let them win. I woke the next morning with fire in my chest. Melissa was humming in the kitchen, pouring coffee like nothing had happened. She handed me a mug with that same smile I used to believe in, but now I saw it for what it was. Masking lies, covering betrayal. I thanked her, forcing calm into my voice, but inside my head I was replaying every word she and Martin had exchanged. Once Robert passes, Daniel will be left with nothing. The cruelty in her voice stung more than the cheating itself. She didn't just betray me, she wanted to erase me. I knew if I confronted her now, she'd deny everything, twist it around, maybe even accuse me of being paranoid. And Martin? He was a master manipulator, a lawyer who'd made a career out of bending the truth. No, I couldn't go in blind. If I wanted justice, I needed proof. I needed to outsmart them both. That day, I visited my father in the hospital. He was weaker than I remembered. His skin was pale, his once strong frame reduced to a fragile figure swallowed by sheets. He squeezed my hand and whispered, "Son, make sure they don't take advantage." It rattled me. Had he sensed what was happening? Did he suspect Martin? Or was it just the paranoia of a sick man? I nodded, hiding the storm inside me. "Don't worry, Dad. I've got you." Afterward, I lingered in the hospital hallway and pulled out my phone. I had a contact, someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Andrew Keller, a junior lawyer who once worked at my father's firm but left after clashing with Martin. He was young, hungry, and most importantly, he hated Martin Green with a passion. When Andrew picked up, his voice was cautious. "Daniel, haven't heard from you in a while. I need your help," I said quietly. "And it's about Martin." Silence stretched on the line before Andrew responded. "What did he do?" "More than I can explain over the phone. Can you meet me tonight?" We agreed on a small diner across town. That evening, I slid into the booth across from him. Andrew still had that restless energy, eyes sharp behind his glasses. "Tell me everything," he said. I hesitated, then laid it all out. Melissa, the affair, the conversation I overheard about the will. Andrew listened without interrupting, his expression darkening by the minute. "Martin's been circling your family for years," Andrew finally said. "He controls more than you realize. Properties, offshore accounts, trusts. If he's rewriting your father's will with your wife's help, he's not just cutting you out. He's consolidating power for himself." The words chilled me. "So what do I do?" Andrew leaned in. "First, we get proof. Martin isn't stupid. He'll cover his tracks. But if he's altering legal documents, there'll be inconsistencies. Drafts, signatures, timestamps. We just need one mistake." The plan was simple but dangerous. Andrew would discreetly access records through contacts at the courthouse and the firm Martin used. Meanwhile, my job was to act normal. Smile at Melissa. Pretend I knew nothing. It was the hardest performance of my life. At dinner, Melissa would ask about my day, her eyes gleaming with a false warmth. She'd talk about future vacations, about redecorating the house, about how we'd be okay when my father passed. Each word was a knife twisting deeper. I started noticing smaller things. She was suddenly more invested in my father's appointments, insisting on being present for meetings with Martin. She carried folders she wouldn't let me touch. And whenever I mentioned my father's health, she shifted the topic quickly, as if death was something she was impatiently waiting for. 2 weeks later, Andrew called me. His voice was tense. "Daniel, you were right. I got access to the latest draft of your father's will. Martin's signature is there, but so is Melissa's. That's not normal. Spouses don't sign off on a will unless they're a direct beneficiary. And here's the kicker. Your inheritance clause is gone." I gripped the phone tighter. "Gone? What do you mean gone?" completely erased. The estate is now split between Melissa and a trust managed by Martin's firm. Legally, you don't exist in this version. Rage flared in my chest, but Andrew's voice pulled me back. Calm down. This isn't the final blow. We just need to prove tampering. But Daniel, if this version goes through, you'll be penniless. And Melissa, she'll walk away with everything. That night, I lay in bed beside her, staring at the ceiling again. My wife, the woman I once dreamed of building a family with, was scheming to rob me blind while sleeping inches from me. And Martin, the man my father trusted most, was pulling the strings. I knew then that this wasn't just about revenge. This was war. The next day, I set a small recording device in my office, hidden inside a decorative clock. Melissa often used the space when I wasn't around, taking calls or sorting through documents. I didn't know if I'd catch anything, but I needed every scrap of evidence I could gather. Sure enough, 2 days later, I listened back and heard her voice. Daniel suspects nothing. Martin says the papers are ready, we just need Dad's final signature. Once he's gone, it's ours. My pulse quickened. Then Martin's voice came faintly through the speaker, likely on speakerphone. Make sure Daniel doesn't interfere. If he starts asking too many questions, we'll push for medical incompetence and cut him out entirely. Robert trusts me. He'll sign whatever I put in front of him. I slammed the desk, fury boiling over. They weren't just planning theft. They were exploiting my father's illness, turning his final days into leverage. I called Andrew that night. I've got recordings, enough to raise suspicion at least. Good. Keep building. The more evidence, the harder it'll be for Martin to explain it away. But Daniel, be careful. If they even suspect you know, they'll move faster. You can't tip your hand yet. So I smiled at Melissa the next morning. I kissed her cheek, watched her pack her bag, and listened as she lied about running errands. My father's empire was hanging in the balance, and my marriage was already in ashes. But I wasn't ready to burn them yet. Not until I had enough fuel to watch them both go up in flames. I knew patience was my only weapon. One wrong move, one burst of anger, and I'd lose everything. My father's legacy, my proof, my chance at justice. So I smiled through clenched teeth, kissed my wife on the cheek, and played the role of the clueless husband while my enemies sharpened their knives behind my back. Weeks passed, and my father's condition declined. Each visit was harder than the last. His once commanding voice had withered to a whisper, and though his mind was still sharp, the toll of illness weighed heavy. I stayed by his side as much as I could, but Melissa always found a reason to insert herself into the room whenever Martin came around. One afternoon, I walked in on the three of them together. Melissa perched by my father's bedside, Martin hovering with papers in hand, guiding my father's shaky signature across a page. I forced a smile. What's all this? Melissa jumped, covering her nerves with a laugh. Just some routine updates. You know how these things are? Martin, ever smooth, added, Yes, Daniel, nothing to worry about. Just ensuring your father's wishes are properly documented. But I saw the flicker in his eyes, the brief panic when he realized I'd caught them mid-act. And that's when I knew the time for silent observation was nearly over. That night, I met Andrew again. We sat in his cramped apartment surrounded by files, printouts, and audio recordings spread across the table like the pieces of a puzzle. You've got enough here to bury Martin, Andrew said, tapping one of the transcripts. Forgery, coercion, conflict of interest, professional misconduct, the list goes on. Add in the affair with your wife, and his reputation will be destroyed. But it's not enough, I muttered. I need them to expose themselves in front of everyone. I want Melissa to see the moment her perfect scheme collapses. I want Martin to watch his career go up in flames. Quietly filing charges isn't enough. They need to choke on their own arrogance. Andrew studied me for a moment, then nodded slowly. Then we set the stage. Wait for the will reading. That's when they'll feel untouchable. That's when we hit them hardest. It was cruel, letting my father's death be the stage for revenge. But deep down, I knew he would have wanted justice too. Robert Hayes didn't build his empire to have it stolen by snakes. 2 weeks later, my father passed away in his sleep. I held his hand until the last breath escaped him, tears streaming down my face. Melissa stood a few steps behind me, her expression carefully composed, almost too composed, as if she had been preparing for this moment not with grief, but with anticipation. At the funeral, people wept, stories were shared, and I gave a eulogy that barely scratched the surface of what my father meant to me. Melissa cried on command, clutching tissues and drawing sympathetic looks, while Martin played the role of stoic confidant, patting my back as if he weren't the vulture circling my inheritance. I bit my tongue, the taste of blood and rage on it, waiting for the day I knew was coming. The following week, we gathered in the conference room of Martin's firm. The room smelled of polished wood and expensive cologne. Family friends, distant relatives, and key business associates filled the chairs. At the head of the long table sat Martin, crisp suit, smug smile, papers stacked neatly before him. Melissa sat beside me, hand resting lightly on mine like she was the grieving widow instead of the betrayer she was. Martin cleared his throat. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for attending the reading of Robert Hayes's last will and testament. This is a solemn occasion, but also a moment to honor his wishes. He began to read, his voice calm, rehearsed. As the pages turned, I noticed something. My name was absent. Entire sections where I should have been mentioned were gone, erased, as if I'd never existed. Instead, vast portions of the estate were redirected. Trusts managed by Martin's firm, properties and liquid assets funneled directly into Melissa's name. Gasps rippled through the room. Whispers erupted. My jaw clenched, but I stayed quiet, watching Melissa's smile creep wider, watching Martin bask in the power he thought he'd secured. When Martin finished, he looked around the room, confident. That concludes Robert Hayes's will. As executor, I will ensure these wishes are carried out promptly. I stood slowly, every eye turning toward me. My voice cut through the room like a blade. Funny thing about wishes, Martin. They don't mean much when they're forged. The room fell silent. Melissa stiffened beside me. Martin's smugness faltered. What exactly are you implying, Daniel? He asked, his tone sharp. I pulled a folder from my bag and dropped it on the table with a heavy thud. Inside were transcripts of recordings, copies of earlier drafts of the will, and the audio device Andrew had painstakingly transcribed. I'm implying, I said evenly, that you and my wife have been conspiring for months to alter my father's will. I'm implying that this document you just read is a fraud. And I have proof. Murmurs exploded across the room. Melissa shot to her feet, face pale. Daniel, this is insane. How dare you accuse me of— Shut up, I snapped, my voice booming with a force that silenced her instantly. I looked around at the stunned faces. I followed her. I heard them. I recorded their conversations. They weren't just sleeping together. They were plotting to erase me, to steal from a dying man. Gasps. Whispers. All eyes turned to Martin now, whose face had drained of color. He opened his mouth, searching for words. But I cut him off by pressing play on the recording device. Melissa's voice filled the room. Daniel suspects nothing. Martin says the papers are ready. We just need Dad's final signature. Once he's gone, it's ours. Then Martin's voice followed. Make sure Daniel doesn't interfere. If he starts asking too many questions, we'll push for medical incompetence and cut him out entirely. The recording ended, and the silence that followed was deafening. Melissa collapsed back into her chair, trembling. Martin sputtered, This is taken out of context. But Andrew stepped forward from the back of the room, holding another file. Not out of context. Cross-referenced with official drafts. Signatures don't match, dates don't line up. Fraud is clear. Now the room wasn't just shocked. It was hostile. Family members shouted, associates muttered angrily. And within minutes, Martin's composure shattered. He grabbed at his papers, but his hands shook too badly. Daniel, listen, we can work this out, he stammered. I leaned forward, my voice low and cutting. No, Martin. You've worked your last con. You used my father's trust to line your pockets. You used my wife to do your dirty work. Now you'll lose everything. Melissa turned to me, tears streaming down her face, desperation clawing at her voice. Daniel, please. I didn't mean— It was Martin. He manipulated me. I laughed bitterly. You think that matters? You weren't just unfaithful, Melissa. You were ready to rob me blind. You stood over my father's deathbed and helped forge his legacy. You disgust me. The fallout was swift. Martin was reported to the state bar, stripped of his license, and faced criminal charges for fraud and forgery. His empire collapsed overnight. Melissa filed for divorce, but with the prenuptial agreement my father had insisted on, she walked away with nothing but her shame. The rightful will, My father's true will was recovered through Andrew's contacts, validated in court, and executed as he had intended. The estate, the properties, the legacy, everything was preserved. But none of that compared to the satisfaction of that moment in the conference room, watching the two people who thought they'd outsmarted me crumble in front of everyone. Months later, I stood on the balcony of my father's estate, the city skyline stretching before me. I thought of my father, of his warning not to let anyone take advantage, and of the betrayal that almost succeeded. Melissa had vanished. Martin's name was ruined. And me? I was still standing. Stronger, smarter, hardened by fire. They wanted to erase me. Instead, I erased them. And as I looked out at the empire my father built, I whispered to myself the words that had carried me through every sleepless night. She wanted my father's fortune. He wanted my father's trust. In the end, they both lost everything, including me.